No. This guy's not pro Falun Gong, by the way. He's just, I think he's critical of the Chinese government's like repression and like more authoritarian tendencies because he is a lib. And it's understandable to be critical of some of the restrictions on civil liberties that the Chinese government represents.
Billboards claiming to be #1 trusted news. Ads offering a...
All right, hold on. First of all, let's start off with this.
I felt inspired and filled with hope. I just said, hey, you know, these people can do these crazy flips up there. They have this dedication to Chinese culture. I mean, what am I missing from my life that I could also put that much effort into? I had an incredible time. I thought it was a wonderful performance. Yeah, it was really amazing acrobatics.
CEO Racial Jake.
And the music were really something else.
神韵舞蹈演员的精湛技艺令 Jake 感到不可思议，叹为观止。
I thought they were just incredible. I mean, my God, I don't know how you could perform some of those. I mean, I don't want to call them stunts, but those dances, I mean, they were just amazing.
No, it is Racial Jake. They just wrote Rachel Jake. His real name is Racial Jake.
Well, we should revive all traditional cultures. And I think traditional Chinese culture will definitely get a shot in the arm from Shen Yun. I just think you did a wonderful job, and I hope to see it. I can't believe it's a new show every year. I'll go next year.
Jake 的公司员工高级软件工程师 Steven Goldberg 对神韵交响乐团赞不绝口，感谢神韵带给他如此意外的惊喜。
I went in not really knowing what to expect at all, so it really
Steven Goldberg, young Chomsky,
kind of blew me away. Yeah, very energetic, very colorful. I'm a musician, so I always enjoy seeing a live orchestra. So yeah, it was a lot of fun. And a lot of surprises because I just didn't really know what I was getting into. Oh, it was great. I mean, always, you know, bring something special when the music's being performed live, you know, as opposed to recorded. So yeah, I mean, they had a great sound. It was very lively, very energetic. A lot of fun to be in the audience.
新唐人电视台记者李先送生话，纽约林肯中心采访报道。
Oh man, I love race. All right, let's watch this.
1999, around 5 a.m., a considerable crowd began clustering around Beihai Park in central Beijing. No one carried a banner or megaphone. No one shouted slogans. It wasn't much out of the ordinary for one of China's largest parks in the heart of this metropolis. That is, until the group began moving westward, across Beihai Bridge toward Zhongnanai, the central government complex of the Chinese Communist Party. By 8 a.m., more than 20,000 had gathered on Fuyu Street in front of the general office of the State Council in a series of silent, orderly lines. Still, not a banner or sign in sight. It remained entirely unclear what the bizarre gathering was about. By now, Luo Gan, Party Secretary of Legal and Political Affairs, had no choice but to call Jiang Zemin, the General Secretary of the party and the country's highest authority. As Luo explained the situation, Jiang grew increasingly worried. Whoever was behind this, it was surely a protest. The first in the history of the People's Republic to occur at Zhongnanai and the largest in Beijing since the 1989 crisis, which still haunted Jiang. Comprehending the situation's severity, Jiang tersely ordered Luo to figure it out. So Luo tapped Zhu Rongji, China's premier, the country's second highest ranking official, to assist in bringing an end to the mysterious standoff. But Luo and Zhu's first move wasn't to call in security forces to break up the demonstration. Instead, they would negotiate. Upon meeting with Luo and Zhu, the gathering's leaders made their purpose clear. They were practitioners of a type of Qigong, or slow movement exercise, known as Falun Gong. And they demanded the release of fellow practitioners arrested during a demonstration days earlier in Tianjin, a nearby port city. Zhu and Luo were confused. They had heard of Falun Gong, but they'd known Qigong as merely a form of gentle exercise meant for the elderly. To mobilize so many people almost in an instant seemed an impossibility. More worrying, The 5 leaders present for the negotiations were employees of the Army's Chief of Staff Department, Beijing University, and the Ministries of Supervision, Railways, and Public Security, all crucially important institutions for the regime. Over 6 hours, Luo and Su ultimately diffused the situation by conceding to all the group's demands, promising to release the Tianjin practitioners, that the government had no quarrel with Qigong groups such as theirs, and that all present at Zhongnanai would execution. Beijing had caved. The crowd had won. And so they dispersed. But Su was only number 2. His promises were still subject to the approval of Jiang Zemin, and for Jiang, the whole thing was nothing short of a disaster. Later that night, he penned a letter to high party members, chastising them for their lack of awareness and demanding answers. What was this group? How did they mobilize such numbers? And who was in charge? Almost nothing is known about what happened behind the party curtain between that day and June 7th. When Jiang convened a meeting of the Politburo Standing Committee and gave a speech which left no room for ambiguity. Quote, "The Central Committee team on Falun Gong shall take immediate actions to organize resources, track down the Falun Gong organizational structure throughout China, formulate a crackdown strategy, and be fully mobilized to break and wipe out Falun Gong. We shall not wage a war without preparations." His philosophy, since the day he took power in the 1989 crisis, had always been very simple. We do not negotiate with protesters. Around midnight, the morning of July 20th, 88 days after the unprecedented and mysterious gathering, the government finally issued its real response. Security forces across the country were dispatched to arrest Falun Gong leading members. Protests erupted in response. Within 2 days, the government formally announced the ban on the practice of Falun Gong. The war between Falun Gong and Beijing, still raging to this day, had begun. How did this happen?
I hope they.
This video is actually a supercut of.
I hope they start harvesting the organs soon. Is this when they start? Look at the comments, please. After the disturbing content warning, I got an ad for Timu. God is real. He knows how to crack a joke. Falun Gong is huge here in Brooklyn for some reason. My husband's family actually immigrated from China to the U.S. between the late 80s and 90s because of Falun Gong. Father-in-law was a really calm and quiet man. Apparently, my father-in-law had very senior family members who had gotten involved with Falun Gong and ended up dead shortly afterwards. Falun Gong is such a mysterious cult. My mom had a classmate who was in the cult in Singapore. She died under suspicious circumstances. I think it's very important to note that Falun Gong in part because one of his close friends became a cult member and they refused modern medicine that would have otherwise saved them. It's so stupid. I remember my mom being frustrated the government was being too lenient on the Falun Gong because they were clearly a cult. And Chiang finally kicked them out after an incident where they got their members to self-immolate. Yeah. I think if you don't deal with some of these cults, like you turn into Japan. And it's additionally dangerous because the worst version of that is Korea. Sometimes also directly involved with the cults in Japan. Or the United States with Scientology. You're never beating the CIA allegations. Wait, what? The devastating version of this, especially propped up by the CIA, would be the Moonies in Korea. And then there are a shit ton of other cults in Japan as well that did insane in Japan. Like over and over and over again. And I don't know if I'm sure they develop organically, but what ends up happening is, even if they develop organically, the American State Department will be like, "Oh, this is great. We'll take advantage of this," and then it becomes a much larger problem down the line. I was walking out of a university here in Japan. There was someone handing out brochures for all the students to watch some family-friendly video streaming service. The company behind the service was some generic name. I looked who owned it and found out they were Falun Gong. Yeah, Falun Gong is all over the place. It's pretty terrifying.
2 older videos we're re-releasing now in this format because 1, the combination tells the full story better, and 2, because YouTube age.
Why aren't you worried about Turkey and the spies too? What? Turkey's a NATO country, chatter. America already controls Turkey. And on top of that, there is a very active cult similar to the Falun Gong that worked within the ranks of the United States. Fethullah Gulen was the leader of it. And Fethullah Gulen and Recep Tayyip Erdogan, the current leader of Turkey, actually were also under another American-backed asset, an Islamist asset. And they only parted ways when America decided that Erdogan was not as controllable as a force and wanted Gulen and his parallel government to take control over Turkey when the famous coup happened. Or maybe you were making a joke about Eric Adams. I don't know. There's cults. There's anti-government cults and parallel states that have tremendous influence, depending on like a country like Turkey, for example. In every country, MEK is another example for Iran. And lo and behold, this might come as a surprise to people who are not knowledgeable about CIA's activities. Every single one of them is directly involved with our State Department. How wonderful.
Restricted and demonetized this, the first part, when it was first shared about a year and a half ago due to just a few seconds of
What's your
footage
definition of a
depicting
cult? Is that a fact? You literally don't have any idea what you're talking about. You're telling me, a Turkish man who is a lot more knowledgeable on this issue than you, I don't know what the fuck I'm talking about parallel states developed and designed by the State Department? The fuck? Are you okay? What's your definition of a cult? Do you think the Moonies are not a cult? Do you think Scientology is not a cult? Are you a Scientologist? I thought, pick a struggle. I thought you were just an Asmongold fan. I didn't realize you were also potentially a cult defender. Jesus Christ. What do you take issue with?
Chinese police brutality toward peaceful protesters. Unfortunately, we have had to remove the footage YouTube found objectionable, despite its documentary and historical value. Now, if you do want to see this video as it was meant to be seen, you can at Nebula, a creator-owned streaming platform that cultivates great storytelling rather than censoring it. Because without ads, Nebula doesn't need to satisfy corporate demands for the sanitation of tough stories, creating an environment where great, thoughtful stories can thrive. That freedom is a big reason why so many of our favorite creators call Nebula home, like Real Life Lore, Wendover, Tirzu, Neo, Internet Shaquille, and more, offering not just uncensored versions of what you'd find on YouTube, but all kinds of fantastic original creations too, like Wendover's globe-trotting game show Jetlag, Real Life Lore's Modern Conflicts and War Room, and Neo's Underexposure, among so much else. To watch this video ad-free and uncensored, or any of the other great work on Nebula, use our link, go.nebula.tv/spectacles. That link gets you 40% off a Nebula subscription, just $36 a year or $3 a month. You can even grab lifetime memberships that last as long as you and Nebula both exist. That's all at go.nebula.tv/spectacles. That said, let's get back to Falun Gong. Our story starts some years before the founding of this bizarre cult in the 1980s. For China, a time of enormous change. The father of the revolution, Mao Zedong, is dead. In his place is Deng Xiaoping, a man with little taste
for... This guy, if I recall correctly, loves Deng Xiaoping.
Predecessor's central planning, repression, and cult of personality, which left millions of Chinese bodies in his wake. Deng wanted China to open up, to cultivate innovation, and that meant relaxing the government's iron grip on the economy and society. The social change was massive. Free from total fealty to Marxism and atheism, many found themselves adrift, unmoored from any tradition thanks to years of government repression, yet yearning for spiritual fulfillment. In turn, new religious movements proliferated, each with their own blend of modern sensibilities and attachment to the past. Nothing, however, rivaled the explosive popularity of Qigong, a slow movement exercise that connected the health of the body with
Have you ever seen someone from the Turkish cult in the US? Yes, his name is Enes Kantar, also now known as Enes Kantar Freedom.
Health of the spirit.
To Deng's eyes, Qigong was, in a sense, an effort to modernize Chinese spirituality in a distinctively Chinese way. However, it wasn't just Chinese spirituality that was changing. Deng's social opening also meant a relaxation of political censorship. And that allowed people to speak about politics in ways that would have, just a few years earlier, resulted in arrest, disappearance, or murder by state forces. However, loosening censorship without any real democratic reform meant that China's starry-eyed youth now had a taste for freedom, while the government withheld the good stuff. Then, in the spring of 1989, it happened. That event, which
Bro, he's a real fucking Cinnaboo. Like, he's got like, I feel like I've seen these this is the most Chinese glass. Yeah, he's got the fit.
still haunted Jiang.
Bro, Reddit knacks at liberals
Tens
all
of
love
thousands
Deng.
of
Really?
students descended on Beijing's Tiananmen Square, not far from Zhongnanai, to call for democracy. For a moment, a few top party officials wavered, but as the movement grew, surpassing 100,000 people in the heart of the capital, hardliners brought in the army and opened fire. In the end, casualties reached into the thousands. Deng had little choice but to replace his protester-sympathizing general secretary with his polar opposite, Jiang Zemin, a man who had, at this moment, just one thing in mind. We do not negotiate with protesters.
I don't know
By
what he's showing.
1993, Jiang had solidified his hold on power.
I don't know what he's showing, so I don't know what happened. You know what I mean? I can't see. I don't know.
And once more tightened the party's grip on political activity. But Jiang was no mindless tyrant. He saw a difference between political, also known as dangerous, activity, and harmless social groups. He had no interest in reigniting Mao's total war on society, and that was obvious because Jiang's government continued to support the Qigong craze, which was still going strong. If nothing else, it seemed an effective way for senior citizens to keep in shape and out of state-funded medical care.
But Qigong wasn't just about bodily health. It was about spiritual wellness. And that placed it squarely at the center of something the government very much still intended to control: religion. Because with the blossoming of new religious movements, to paraphrase Voltaire, come both fools and scoundrels. After all, fools who follow scoundrels are fools not following the state. One such scoundrel was about to make an enormous impact in China. His name is Li Hongzhi.
Now, according to Li's own telling, written after his rise to prominence, his early life was about the craziest thing you've ever heard. Mentored by masters of Eastern spirituality, by age 8, he could levitate and turn invisible. You know, the usual. The more plausible story? He was a horn player in a police marching band and a low-level, pencil-pushing clerk. So, mediocre man that he was, in the 1980s, Li joined the fad. Another drop in the Qigong bucket. But as it turned out, he was pretty good at it. This could be Li's time to shine. In 1992, he held his own Qigong workshop, and it was a big success. Looking for a way to burnish his credentials so he could keep the game going, Li went to the government-backed Qigong Society to register himself as an official master of Qigong and his organization as an official practice, which he called Falun Gong.
But it's important to pause here and note that Li was registered with the government to do all this stuff. What's more, the government actually seemed to love him. He held workshops at state universities and even became a symbol of China's opening up to the world, lecturing at the Chinese embassy in Paris and even touring America, where he was made an honorary citizen of Houston, Texas, among other places.
With all his official credentials and government relationships, Li and Falun Gong were getting even more popular. From 1992 to 94, he hosted 56 workshops with at least 60,000 total attendees. At its peak, Falun Gong had at least 3 million practitioners in China, though Li himself would claim much higher, absurdly higher numbers. Speaking of Li's more outlandish claims, around the end of 1994, Li went and published a guide to his teachings, which was a religious text, and a pretty strange one to boot, mixing Buddhism, Taoism.
I feel like this guy doesn't really appreciate the glorious tenets implemented by our Falun Gong leader here. I don't know.
And Qigong.
No problem.
But add Li's ideas and...
When I said no problem, what I meant was no problem. Ignore me.
Because what you get is a bizarre theology which promises superpowers like eternal youth, flight, invisibility, and mind control to his followers, just so long as they aren't gay or married to someone of another race.
Wait, what? America would never entertain a homophobic anti-miscegenation cult only because they are anti-communist party of China. That would not. That's
because
not it.
Also, heaven is racially segregated, and interracial children are vehicles for aliens, who, by the way, created modern medicine, seeking to possess human bodies and take over the world. Yeah, it's a lot.
Okay, to be fair, I think it's really fucked up if America doesn't collaborate with this guy, considering that RFK Jr. is responsible for the HHS. You can't have RFK Jr. in a position of prominence in your cabinet and then simultaneously be like, well, these guys are a bridge too far. You know what I mean? He also hates modern medicine.
Still, most in the government didn't bat an eye. But a few took notice. Li's claims, especially about medicine, were dangerous. And those paying attention could tell Falun Gong was becoming an all-consuming obsession for its practitioners. A potential threat to the party's grip on society.
But before most of the party was aware, local state-run news organizations across China picked up the scent of a good story and began running articles and TV segments critical of Falun Gong in 1996. In response, Falun Gong practitioners bombarded the outlets with letters demanding they retract their statements. Now, the letter-writing campaign hadn't been Li's initiative. His adherents had done it all on their own. But Li liked what he saw. He co-opted their efforts, transforming Falun Gong's theology to follow suit. From now on, responding to criticism from the government would be considered a necessary part of achieving spiritual perfection. Still, despite eventually losing their official status in the Qigong Society and all this attention from government outlets, no clear, coordinated opposition from the government reared its head. And the group muddied along in a legal gray area, theoretically exposed, but apparently untargeted. But this couldn't go on forever. Despite Li's apolitical professions, his theology, implicitly critical of the government's Marxism and skeptical of modern science, could be tolerated no longer. So, in April of 1999, this tenuous standoff broke. A Chinese physicist named He Shuoshu published a scathing attack on the practice of Qigong. In response, Falun Gong practitioners descended on Tianjin University, where He worked, for a massive protest. The police countered harshly, attacking protesters and arresting 45 of them. For those fiercely faithful to Falun Gong, this was a crisis. They had to do something big. Another small, localized protest would be insufficient, either to secure the arrested practitioner's release or to correct the record on Qigong. They had to go to Beijing. So, on April 25, 1999, around 5 a.m., a considerable crowd began clustering around Beihai Park in central Beijing. Then, they marched on Zhongnanai.
So, how did a huckster with a shabby background convince the CCP that he and his organization posed the greatest threat to the party since the Tiananmen protests of 1989? Well, in some ways, that's the wrong question. You see, it was the party's repression that so upset society and paved the way for scoundrels like Li. The party's paranoid need for social control that radicalized the group into political action. Falun Gong, its worldviews, and its theology were unhinged from the start, but it only really became a political force, one that demanded extraordinary devotion of its members, thanks to political repression. In other words, it was the party's own fear that brought some 20,000 Falun Gong practitioners to Zhongnanai on April 25th, 1999, and transformed a slow movement exercise group into a fierce enemy.
Dude, what are we talking about? You had fucking, by your own admission, they were mobilizing in a decentralized manner. At that point, like, I think the government has every right and responsibility, not even right, responsibility to try and deal with that, because it's becoming an incredibly dangerous fuck called. Only Americans look at a situation like that and go, just let them do whatever the fuck they want to do. No, man. That's how you get measles, dog. What do you mean? That's how you get fucking measles. Look at cases of measles rising in Texas. Why is that happening? Because there's motherfuckers like this, okay, the American version of this shit, hopped up on American exceptionalism and American individualism fumes, going, I don't want to fucking inoculate my child. Why would I do that? I don't want to make my child gay and autistic. Like, this is the type of shit that is frustrating when, like, a competent administrative state engages in what a competent administrative state is supposed to do. Like, what are you supposed to do? You just let these guys run wild? Like, what the fuck? It's a public health risk. I'm sorry.
A fierce enemy who wouldn't be quashed so easily. Protest and opposition from Falun Gong was far from over.
It's January 23rd, 2001, 9 a.m. In Beijing, 7 visitors in town for the holiday from Kaifeng, where they've been staying for several days. For their day out, each brings a bottle of Sprite. Within the hour, they arrive at their first stop, Tiananmen Square, a massive plaza in the city center, once home to legendary pro-democracy demonstrations, but these days more popular with cult members protesting religious persecution. Regardless, one of the capital's biggest attractions. Unfortunately, the plaza was closed for some kind of event, but instead of contenting themselves by proceeding on their itinerary and returning the next day for the New Year's celebrations, the group determined to hang around and peruse the area nearby, agreeing to meet again at 2:30. They synchronized their watches. 4.5 hours later, one of the group's members returned to the area and began walking toward the People's Heroes Monument in the square's center. But on his way there, as though he needed some rest, Wang Jindong stopped, took a seat on the ground, pulled out his Sprite, and poured it all over himself. The gasoline fumes burned his nostrils. Then, he lit himself on fire. Nearby police rushed at him, extinguishing the flames and erecting barriers to hide him from view. He was still alive. Distracted by Wang, the police were slower to notice when suddenly 4 more bodies went up in flames around the square. Wang's friends. Before the officers could reach them, one perished.
Yeah, this is the fault of government repression, I think. Like, what do you mean? It's the fault of the Chinese government for not stopping this as soon as they started doing the letter campaign. Okay? If I'm in charge of the Chinese government and I see these motherfuckers doing a letter campaign, I'm like, nope, you're done. Like, far before they start self-immolating. Okay? Because you do the decentralized letter writing campaign, and then before you know it, they're self-immolating. Okay? No shot. That is unironically for public safety. It's for the safety of the individuals that are a part of the cult. I mean, Japan did something recently after the Shinzo Abe assassination. Like, it shouldn't have taken the assassination of Shinzo Abe for the Japanese government to disband, the Unification Church. I wonder how this guy feels about the fact that the no. This guy's not pro Falun Gong, by the way. He's just. I think he's critical of the Chinese government's like repression and like more authoritarian tendencies because he is a lib, and it's understandable to be critical of some of the restrictions on civil liberties that the Chinese government represents. No, he's not anti-China. I don't even think he's anti-China. I think he's, in a weird way, I think he's like pro-Deng and pro-China. He just wants like markets to be unleashed upon China. But Like some of the reasons why he's critical of the Communist Party of China, I think, is because all those sacred organs burned to ashes for no reason, such a waste. I'm starving. That's okay, dude. You're joking, but like someone unironically is going to clip this and be like, Hasan makes fun of the real thing that the Chinese government does all the time, which is the Han Chinese eat the Falun Gong organs, famously harvest them and eat them. I saw an Epoch Times article, as a matter of fact.
As the others stood up and began stumbling around, waving their arms as the pain became unbearable. They came to protest on behalf of Falun Gong, a new religious movement banned in China since 1999. They believed their faith in Master Li's teachings would render them immune to the scorching pain. They were wrong. While in other times and places, self-immolation may be a successful catalyst for political change, in a nation as atheistic...
Okay, dude, America, also, self-immolation just doesn't work anymore, okay? Clearly. I mean, multiple people engaged in active self-immolation in protest of America's continued defense of Israel.
As China, self-destructive superstition is less likely to gain sympathy, especially when the government responds by publicizing graphic media of the event across the country, alongside articles castigating an illegal cult as a cause of mass suicide demonstrations. Meanwhile, Li Hongzhi, great master of Falun Gong, disowned the demonstrators. He was against suicide, he argued, and so they must be very bad followers.
That's phony. You just let your dudes fucking do that, and then you just dropped it out.
Or the whole thing was staged by the government. By so transparently throwing attempted martyrs under the bus, Li exposed himself as not just a liar, but a heartless, vicious one at that. Public opinion, once sour on the repression, now began to warm to the government's years-old campaign, which officials, in turn, intensified. School programs demanding children state their allegiance to science spread across the country. Companies, both Chinese and...
China did Reddit atheism. They said, oh my science.
Foreign-owned.
China did state-mandated Reddit atheism, where you're not supposed to say, oh my God, you're supposed to say, oh my science. When you sneeze, you're not supposed to say bless you, you're supposed to say science you.
Were compelled to identify Falun Gong practitioners in their workforce. Those apprehended were sent to re-education.
By the way, it's fucking hilarious that like he's showing American news articles directly using repression against a psychopathic cult that he recognizes a psychopathic cult as like state repression. And of course, if you noticed, American newspapers are covering this shit like, how could China do this? How could China be so ruthless? Okay? This is why I say we should do this kind of China shit to our cults. Okay? Like, it's like whenever they fucking post, you know, China executed another billionaire for knowingly selling a spoiled baby formula. And I'm like, why can't we get a little bit of that? Like, what do you mean? Why can't we get a little bit of that? I guess the closest we've gotten to that is like Waco. But even then, dude, the way that these guys treated Falun Gong is still significantly better than fucking Waco. I don't think the Chinese government, as far as I know, went into a compound where the fucking Falun Gong were at and like gassed the entire compound and killed the children in the compound. They're just disbanding the cult. So even when America does some shit, even when America tries to deal with a fucking cult, they just deal with it in the most American way possible. First gassed and then burned them alive. Sorry.
Or, if they proved tough to convert, instead shipped to labor camps to first be broken physically. Reliable estimates placed the number killed in the campaign over.
In America, when you are when you fucking are a QAnon cult member, you get into the government now. Okay? That's what we do to our cult members. We take our cult members and we go, oh, are you in a cult? Great. Please join the federal government, please. RFK Jr. is anti-medicine and he runs medicine. He runs medicine in the government. He runs health and human services, okay? So part of that is de facto running the medicine. The guy who is anti-medicine, who may or may not have a fucking brainworm, well, we know he has a brainworm, but we don't know if it actually controls his mind, is literally in the government. Tulsi Gabbard, also in a cult, literally in the government. Oh my God.
3,000. But all that is just the beginning. Before going any further, it's worth quickly clarifying what actually is Falun Gong and who is Li Hongzhi. Well, Falun Gong began in 1992 as a variant of Qigong, a form of slow movement exercise extremely popular in China at the time. By 1999, it had garnered at least 3 million practitioners and even the support of the government, who saw in Falun Gong's founder, Li Hongzhi, a useful cultural ambassador. However, after it took on increasingly spiritual and religious attributes, Falun Gong started to worry the CCP. Years of tension followed until the CCP's treatment of Falun Gong got harsher, and the movement responded by state.
Oh yeah, Supreme Court Justice Amy Covid Barrett is in a cult that had to change her rank from handmaid after The Handmaid's Tale came out. Then there's also the American government is not only like 30 companies in a trench coat, but it's also 30 cults in a trench coat as well. It's so nutty. It's just cults all the way up and down. Maybe that's the reason why we fucking utilize cults overseas to enact change in these governments, to like use them as a destabilizing force, because we're like, well, it's destabilizing to us. We know better than anybody else, let me tell you.
Staging a massive protest outside the central government headquarters, terrifying the party. What came next was a nationwide ban, followed by an intense crackdown. So it was in this context that those 5 people set themselves ablaze in Tiananmen Square 2 years later.
Luckily for Li, he'd left China a couple years before the crackdown began. Maybe he sensed the coming change in the political winds. Pretty soon, he settled in, of all places, New York. More on that in a minute. But Li wasn't retiring in defeat. Anything but. In his eyes, for Falun Gong to fight back, they needed to go global. Just take a look at this graph. Starting in 1999, when the crackdown began, Falun Gong events outside of China skyrocketed as the group sought to share its story of repression with the world. And it wasn't just events either. In 2000, some of Li's top lieutenants started the Epoch Times, a newspaper dedicated to exposing the wicked abuses of the CCP. Just a few
Motherfucker
years
lives
later,
in LA, bro. That's crazy. It's Santa Monica.
Li started Shen Yun, a ballet aiming to tell the story of how the CCP destroyed Chinese culture. And, of course, Falun Gong.
Now, you may be thinking, well, this sounds great. Cultural output, freedom of the press, and yeah, fair enough, but there are a few kinks in this story. Set aside, for now, that the Epoch Times would go on to become one of America's most prominent far-right conspiracy rags, or that Shen Yun explicitly calls the theory of evolution a deadly idea. Because it wasn't Li leading this crusade against the CCP. No, he was busy developing Falun Gong's theology so that his followers would do all this for him. Suddenly, it became a core belief of Falun Gong that the battle between them and the CCP was just one level of a multi-dimensional conflict between good and evil. If practitioners didn't participate, well, they'd be on the side of evil itself. And since fighting evil by achieving—
These are the Moonies? No, this is the Chinese Moonies. The Moonies were Korean. They also made a foothold in Japan. And someone in the chat was saying that maybe they also might have done had a foothold in fucking Japan as well, Falun Gong themselves. Oh.
Global reach for your newspaper and ballet is actually kind of resource and time intensive. It turned out that the best thing loyal Falun Gong practitioners could do was volunteer. A lot. Many Epoch Times journalists work for free, churning out factually dubious clickbait. And while Shen Yun's skilled dancers are compensated, the practitioners who put on the show are not. Okay, you might be thinking, well, this doesn't sound great, but it's not that crazy for a religious group to use volunteers. And sure, even if Falun Gong's demands outstrip basically every modern established religion, that's fair enough.
Except, like, The Moonies are so pervasive that they are the reason why sushi is as popular as it is in the United States of America. Didn't they have like a monopoly on sushi restaurants for the longest time? Moonies, the Korean cult, is literally a almost sole controller, sole distributor of the fish that is still used in sushi restaurants. And they are the ones who introduced sushi and made it massively popular in the United States of America.
Except consider, just for one moment, what it is Falun Gong actually preaches. The core belief is that Li is a supernaturally gifted teacher meant to help his followers achieve physical, moral, and spiritual perfection through this particular exercise. But you can't just do the Qigong. You actually need Li to implant a spinning wheel inside you, so that you can collect good energy from the universe through the practice of Qigong and the observance of the 3 moral virtue, forbearance, and truthfulness.
Okay, a little odd, but heart's in the right place, right?
Oh, yeah.
Well,
Come here.
good news and bad news. Good news is that you don't have to travel to New York for Li to implant the wheel. He can do it from anywhere in the world using his mind powers. Phew. Bad news is that Li instructs his followers to lie to outsiders about Falun Gong. So, truthfulness may be a hard one. Oh, and more bad news, homosexuality and interracial marriage are evil. More specifically, they corrupt the soul and leave room for aliens to possess human bodies, which Li explains, saying, quote, "The human body is the most perfect in the universe. It is the most perfect form. The aliens want the human body." And don't ask what the aliens look like. According to Li, quote, "You don't want..."
Bro, I think this dude fell for a Asian baddie one time and it fucking altered his consciousness permanently. Like he saw one Asian baddie and was like, these guys are not real. They're fucking aliens. Like this is not, we can't let this happen. Okay. We can't let this ever happen again. We must stop because they are so fucking, they're the best. Like it's just unstoppable.
Want to have that kind of thought in your mind.
Okay, but lots of religions believe things that seem wild to outsiders, and plenty hate gay people and reject evolution. Still, bad, but let's talk about the whole anti-evolution shtick from Shen Yun. As it happens, in their effort to corrupt and possess humanity, those sinister aliens also invented technology, science, and ideas like evolution. These things, Li says, lead man away from Qigong and spiritual perfection by convincing them modern medicine can heal them, keeping their bodies and souls weak and vulnerable. Oh, and the aliens are also using modern science to clone humans so they can possess their soulless bodies, so there's that. The real trouble with all this is, well, the people Li's basically killed with his teachings.
It's very cool that a big part of like the anti-China conspiracy theories have directly come from this cult, by the way. Very cool, very fun. So that like 90% of the time when you're talking to the average American about like China and they just come up with some insane fucking statement and you're like, what? Where did you hear that? It's these fucking guys. It has been directly planted in the collective consciousness of Americans from this psychopathic cult. Thank you, CIA. Job well done. Stop.
Back in '99, Beijing justified the crackdown with an estimate that Falun Gong had caused 1,400 preventable
like the organ
deaths
harvesting
and suicides. Although real, reliable numbers are almost impossible to come by, thanks to the group's secrecy and their ongoing propaganda war with Beijing. Consider one Colleen May of Sydney, Australia. One day, she said to her daughter, quote, "I met these lovely people in the park, and they do meditation once a week, and I'm going to go down and do that with them." Soon, she stopped taking the medication for her high blood pressure. Subsequently hospitalized, Colleen pulled out her IVs and spat medicine back at the nurses, believing all along that to use it meant she wasn't a good enough believer in Li. If only she could believe harder, he would use his powers to heal her. At 75 years old, she died of entirely preventable illness. In her daughter's words,
it would have taken 2 tablets a day and she'd still be with us till... I would always joke to people saying that Mum's going to outlive me.
Even worse, Jonathan Lee, Falun Gong's spokesperson, rejected the notion Lee discourages the use of modern medicine, saying,
"Go to the hospital. There's nothing prevent me from going to a hospital."
Then, in the same breath,
"But in the meantime, because of Falun Gong, I don't need to go to the hospital."
In other words, Colleen was wrong to believe those things. And if she had been a better practitioner, she in fact would have remained healthy. If only she had believed harder. Consider also Jianin Liu, who, like the many laborers behind Shen Yun and the Epoch Times, volunteered his time to Falun Gong, working on the construction of Dragon Springs, Lee's secretive and sprawling.
Oh, this is the other.
400
Yeah, if you guys thought this shit wasn't even, if you didn't realize, it gets way crazier. They also have a fucking compound in upstate New York.
Estate in upstate New York. While on the job,
I'm not gonna lie, I understand why Colleen May did what she did. Who amongst us doesn't want to be white Chinese, right? Part of the reason why she died, of course, was that she wasn't like a real white Chinese. I, on the other hand, am different. Like, I am white Chinese, and therefore I would not have died in this situation. But like, I get why she wanted to be white Chinese. You know what I mean? Like, I understand where it's coming from.
Job in 2008, Liu fell from a structure and died. Under normal circumstances, the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, or OSHA, would launch an investigation into such a tragedy. Were proper precautions observed, and was Liu even qualified for this work? But Liu had been a volunteer worker, a Falun Gong practitioner from Toronto, and OSHA can only investigate employee deaths and injuries. Moreover, Liu's own family, thanks to Falun Gong's beliefs about spinning wheels and modern medicine, refused an autopsy.
And this is what gets at the core of Li's character, what makes him and his movement so nefarious. Liu had been engaged in dangerous work, building Li a massive compound, a monument to the greatness of the religion he'd built for no pay. And his total sacrifice met with no accountability from those who had used him. Because built into Falun Gong, its doctrine, its formal structures, is Li's. His superiority to everyone else, Falun Gong practitioner or otherwise. In Li's own condescending words, quote, "You can think of me as a human being."
Consider the Tiananmen Square incident, when 5 people set themselves on fire in an act of terrible.
Branch heads of Falun Gong assign and blessed couples. You may be interested in looking into Mike Chen, Strictly Dumpling, and his wife, who was blessed by Li Hongzhi himself. Mike Chen, Strictly Dumpling, and his wife. I don't know who is that, like a YouTuber?
Extraordinary devotion. Li was across the globe, safe from any retribution, any repression. And when he was called upon to respond, he didn't honor the fallen believers. He didn't even acknowledge their pain. And
Mike Chen, Falun Gong. Oh my God, Mikey Chen. It says on his Wikipedia that he's fucking Falun Gong. This guy is
in the ocean. There's shrimp.
This guy's Falun Gong? Or no, not this guy. Is this the guy? What did you say his name was? Strictly Dumpling? Oh, it is this guy. He's a travel food YouTuber. I used to watch all of his stuff, and I found out he's in the Falun Gong. If you go to his subreddit, it's literally people just shitting on him. You know, it's actually surprising that like a lot of a lot more Americans than you would think are anti-Falun Gong. It is like people make jokes about Shen Yun and stuff in places that I would have never expected. And I don't know if it's just because they thought it was like a weird, lame art thing, or because they recognize it's kind of like Scientology. But it's interesting. Like, your parents are not safe from this shit, for the record. Like, you're 100%. Like, this cult is so perfect for This cult is so fucking perfect for Americans. The important things in my life. Falun Gong. Oh my God. I work a lot on YouTube, but I consider raising awareness of human rights issues in China the most important things that I do. Thanks for watching.
This parade right here is why I'm in San Francisco today. Like I mentioned on many of my channels before, I practice a Chinese meditation exercise called Falun Dafa or Falun Gong. And Falun Gong is a Qigong practice or meditation exercise, kind of similar to Tai Chi. And when this meditation practice started in China in 1992, it became incredibly popular because so many people were getting healthier.
Links. Stop organ harvesting. TheEpochTimes.com. StopOrganHarvesting.org. This is why chatters are making the organ harvesting jokes, by the way, for those of you who don't know. If you have ever heard, like, the Chinese government is, like, arresting people and harvesting their organs, like, that's Falun Gong.
Instead, Li just disowned them. They had set out to prove their devotion. Yet, all they achieved was to intensify the crackdown and, perhaps worse, expose their divine leader as uncaring and oblivious to their suffering.
This story isn't meant to excuse the atrocities the CCP still regularly commits against religious minorities. In fact, the sins of the party were the subject of our previous video on the origins of Falun Gong. Instead, we mean to highlight the similarities between these mortal enemies, Li and the CCP. Each victim group of people, the innocent followers of Falun Gong, who deserve neither to be sent to re-education camps.
I mean, I can't even hate on him because he's like more pro-China than the average lib. Like, he unironically is pro-China. He's anti-China, but he's also weirdly pro-China. Maybe my brain is so distorted, but an anti-China YouTuber will take what Falun Gong is doing and describe it as like a brave religious movement unjustly maligned by the fucking scary communists. He at least says they're crazy and then says they're maligned by the scary Chinese communists. But he spent most of the video being like, these are not good guys, and it's actually good that the Chinese government kind of dealt with them. Like, Drew Pavlov is the average fucking anti-China hawk, okay? That's the liberal. He's an unironic Dengist. Stop organ harvesting in China. I agree. This is like the anti-Hasan. This is like the anti-Hasan propaganda where they like go so hard on the anti-Hasan propaganda that the average person's like, I don't think that's real. Okay? The claims that you're making are so exaggerated that like the average person goes, I don't know if I agree with you, especially because you're so seeking this like insanely exaggerated claim. That's how I feel about my haters too. Like, imagine a random incredibly sweaty dude, incredibly greasy dude walks up to you in public and is like, Hamas, Diddy, Epstein, Piker, HamasAbi, like just starts vomiting out these words. You're gonna be like, what are you? Get away from me. That's how I feel about the Epoch Times style guys as well.
Nor to be educated by a master who persuades them to die of preventable illness. Moreover, each abuses the same.
Dude, do you not care about organ harvesting? Stop making light of this. Don't spread lies about Falun Gong. I've already sunk too much cost into them. Dude, do you not care about organ harvesting? Stop making light of this extremely serious situation. You're right. I read you were pro-cancer because of your Biden take. I wonder which community was making that argument. Couldn't be the fucking content creator who recently attacked a cancer charity stream that I conducted. Couldn't be that guy, right? Mr. Pro-Cancer last week, but now that Biden has it, he's all of a sudden realized he's anti-cancer again, you know? And also falsely smearing me as being...
for the same reasons, in a quest for control. Just as the party demands devotion to Marxism and social conformity, sense of his followers extraordinary devotion to him. It is this total...
It becomes a lot less funny real quick when it's a family member that starts talking about Falun Gong, Falun Dafa
approach to religion, which insists that only the teachings of Li Hongzhi, not modern science, not human equality, not even a democratically legitimate government like America's, has any authority at all that leads people to devote their labor and their lives to Li, to light themselves on fire in Tiananmen Square, to die building the great master an enormous monument.
Okay, I don't know what. Okay, whatever. Shouts out Falun Gong. Shouts out Epoch Times. Anyway, shouts out to the chatters. Love you all. I will see you tomorrow. I'm tired. I need to pee.